Good evening. My name is Anna Quindlen, and I'm a member of the Barnard class of 1974, and I am a Barnard graduate and a mother, although I'm sad to say I am not a Barnard mother. I wanted to give you a little personal background to inform some of the conversation that's going to be here tonight. Like the mothers on this panel, my friends and I gave birth to our children at the dawn of a really unfortunate era of what I think of as uber-momism. Completely unknown to generations past, or as my mother-in-law once said, if no one was bleeding, things were fine. That was more or less the standard of my own childhood, too, which was completely careless and carefree. I mean, if you had asked my mother at any given time where I was, she probably would have stopped spooning Gerber peas into yet another baby's mouth and said, she's around here somewhere. In other words, by modern standards of mothering that dictate that she ought to have known precisely where I was, perhaps because I was taking mini Mandarin, or having a play date, my mother was a complete bust. She also predated the term play date. There's one problem with that conclusion. It's completely wrong. My mother was great at what she did. Most of what I've brought to the table of motherhood, she set there first. She didn't help us build with our erector sets, and she didn't haul us to piano lessons. She couldn't even drive, but where she was always felt like a safe place. I knew without really thinking that if I had kids, I was going to get out of bed each day, or often as it turned out in the middle of the night, and try to be as much like my mother as possible. Kind and loving and always available with peppers, onions, and egg sandwiches with melted mozzarella cheese. Except that I was, unlike my mother, a newspaper columnist and a novelist, which meant that I was winding up trying to be both my mother and my father at the same time. Some trick. The truth is that we all find ourselves, unfortunately, living in a perfection society now, and nowhere has that become more powerful than in what I think of as manic motherhood. The child care guru D.W. Winnicott, who some of the psych students may have studied, once referred to the ordinary devoted mother, and yet that doesn't seem to be good enough anymore. Instead, there's the overscheduled mom who bounces from soccer field to school fair to music lessons until she falls into bed at the end of the day, her life somewhere between the stations of the cross and a decathlon. A perfect storm of trends and events contributed to this. One was the teeter-totter scientific nature of nature versus nurture, which we kept hearing about. When my mother was raising kids, there was a kind of an assumption that they were what they were. But when I became a mother myself, and the rest of us too, all that was changing. And we kept hearing that little minds were infinitely malleable, even before birth. Don't get tense. Tense moms make tense infants. That'll make you tense. I remember being in a prenatal exercise class and lying on the mat working what was left of my stomach muscles, listening to the instructor repeat, "Now hug your baby, hug your baby." And I kept wondering, if I had weak abs, did that mean my baby went unhugged? Well, it turned out that for those of us who came of age during the second wave of feminism, part of the price of freedom was supposed to be guilt. Because how better to circumvent the power of a new woman than with all this nonsense that made it seem like every moment was a teachable moment and every teachable moment missed a measure of a lousy mom. We were all part of the first generation of women who took it for granted that we would work not only throughout our lifetimes but throughout our children's childhoods as well. It was 1976 when Dr. Spock revised his Bible of childcare to say that having a working mom was absolutely fine, but he didn't explain how it would be possible. For those of us who were sort of trying it out, there was actually kind of a nice slapdash approach in the beginning. My first sitter, for example, was the former manager of a cult punk band. She was a really good sitter, too. But quicker than you could say nanny cam, there were books and seminars, and modern motherhood was codified as this kind of profession. Professionalized for women who didn't work outside the home. If they were giving up such great opportunities, then the tending of kids needed to be made into an all-encompassing job. And professionalized for those women who had paying jobs out in the world, because to show that their work was not bad for their kids, they just had to take child rearing as seriously as they did deal making. Let me interject a word about men here. There aren't any, are there? I have never been to an event like this for men, which may be because men who are doing things in their own home are still considered to be helping. And men who are taking care of their own children are sometimes referred to as babysitting. Most of the young women I meet on college campuses are agonizing over how to combine work and family. Most of the young men I meet think that they're going to combine work and family by getting married. And so, we come to this. Breathes her a woman with soul so dead who never to herself has said, were the old ways better? I mean, maybe in some ways they were easier, as one woman who had graduated from Barnard 30 years before I did said to me years ago, oh, you girls with all your choices, I feel so sorry for you. And more than once we've asked ourselves what effect this all has on our children and on how our daughters see us and their own place in the world. Of course, we know what they sometimes tell us. At one college, not this one, a smart young woman stood up and told me pugnaciously that she would be marrying early, having kids quickly, staying home to care for them in the way that only their mother could, and entering the workplace afterwards. She said that she and her friends in their 20s had heard quite enough about epidemic infertility, nanny horror stories, the difficulties of finding a partner later in life. They would not make the same mistakes we had. Some of my friends are enraged by young women like that who pick away at the lives that were so hard won, who blithely say they're not going to make our mistakes. But at some level, you got to acknowledge that they have a point. I know some of my peers who feel they waited too long to have kids, even some who think they were too choosy about who and when and whether to marry. When I was running the Metro desk and female reporters would confide that they were pregnant and then rattle off what sounded like a travel itinerary of due date, maternity leave, and return to work, I would say, wait, and see whether you want to come back right away or take more time. They hadn't realized yet that motherhood is a various thing. But that student detailing her plans for the future on that campus, plans based on the imagined shortcomings of the lives of women like us, hadn't really learned how various life can be. She was making the mistake of bringing a cookie-cutter approach for the future, just like all other generations had done before her. It was just a different cookie. It didn't seem useful to tell her that younger moms might have less patience and experience, that sometimes taking care of children full-time feels like a cross between a carnival ride and penal servitude, that she would be surprised at how many potential employers would consider the resulting gap on her resume to be a deal breaker. Sometimes it feels to me as though generations shout at one another across a canyon with roaring water at the bottom, drowning out the words. So tonight, we're all going to try to cross the canyon. Maybe, since these are generations united by an alma mater and by love, we can dispense with the kind of cheap and easy judgment that I was getting on that other college campus. Dean Denberg will introduce the panel here tonight.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, and your words, as always, are both wise and funny, so thank you. And true. I forgot that part. So I'm Dorothy Denberg. I'm Vice President for College Relations here at the college, and I've known some of the people in the room forever. Among them, Tirza Wahrman, whom I met when she was a junior and at a college fair. And of course, that would result in our having this panel here tonight. It was Tirza who suggested a conversation among Barnard mothers and daughters on this topic, having done one at another of her alma maters. And frankly, in all the years that I've been here as a first-year class dean, as dean of the college, as an advisor to students, it never fails to amaze me that the questions that we're talking about tonight, which are the questions that I sat with classmates in the old, what's now the dance annex, which used to be the annex where commuters hung out before Macintosh was built. We were discussing the same exact issues. Can you have it all? How do you balance? How do you sequence? What should you look for in a life partner to make all these things happen? And these are the same exact conversations that our students are having now in the brand new Diana Center. So it's with great pleasure that's how somebody is balancing. Oh, I know that, baby. Okay. So tonight it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our panelists, and I'm doing this in alphabetical order of the mothers, which will be followed by the daughters in the order of the mothers, if you got that. Since in this brave new world, not one of the daughters, you will notice, has the same last name as her mother. Okay. So, Sharon, if you would be kind enough to raise your hand. Our first alphabetical mother, Sharon Cromer, Barnard class of 1980, is a senior U.S. Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. She has more than 25 years of experience in managing humanitarian and development assistance programs in Asia and Africa. From 1986 to 1996, she served in USAID missions in Pakistan, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal, and then became the deputy mission director in USAID's office in Indonesia, where she remained until 2002. After serving as the mission director in Ghana from 2002 to 2007, and in Nigeria from 2007 to 2009, Ms. Cromer returned to Washington as the USAID Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Management. In May 2010, she was asked to head up USAID's Bureau for Africa. In that role, Ms. Cromer works to advance democracy, equitable economic growth, peace and stability in sub-Saharan Africa through oversight of a $6 billion budget, 27 USAID offices, and more than 2,000 Washington and overseas staff. Born in Washington, Sharon went from Barnard to Georgetown, where she earned her law degree in 1983. She's married to artist Arnold Sobers and has two daughters who are proud Barnard women. On my right, Simone Sobers, 2013, and Courtney Keene, who graduated in 2007. Michelle Friedman, raise your hand. Michelle Friedman graduated from Barnard in 1974. A daughter of Holocaust survivors from Poland, she grew up on a chicken farm in the Catskills. After majoring in religion at Barnard, she got her MD at NYU, did a medical internship at St. Vincent's, followed by a residency in psychiatry at Mount Sinai and training in psychoanalysis at Columbia. Since 1982, she has been in private practice and on the faculty of Mount Sinai, where she is an associate professor of clinical psychiatry. Her professional interests include the interface of psychiatry and obstetrics and gynecology, and the interface between psychiatry and religion. Long active in Jewish communal life, Michelle founded and now chairs the Department of Pastoral Counseling at an open Orthodox rabbinical school, YCT, and has served on the board of the Kraft Center for Jewish Life at Barnard and Columbia. She is married to Benjamin Belfer, Columbia 75, And they are the proud parents of Emily, Penn 2010. Can't hold that against her. I have two who went there too. Sarah, Barnard 2012, and Rachel, Barnard 2015. She enjoys hiking every summer with two Barnard friends. Tirza Wahrman graduated from Barnard in 1978. She's the daughter of a cantor and a full-time homemaker. She majored in economics and wrote her senior thesis at Barnard on the inadequacy of the unemployment rate as a measure of economic distress. Tirza graduated from Yale Law School with a JD in 1981. She began her career as a trial attorney in the U.S. Department of Justice in the Antitrust Division, was then in private practice, and currently serves as a Deputy Attorney General in the Environmental Permitting and Compliance section in Trenton, New Jersey. Tirza has taught as an adjunct professor at Seton Hall Law School and at Barnard in the Political Science Department. She's married to Warren Mitlak, Columbia College 80, and is the proud mother. You notice all these mothers are proud because their daughters went to the right school, and is the proud mother of Deena, Barnard 12, Molly Wellesley, class of 2015, and Hannah, an 8th grader, at the Community Middle School in Plainsboro, New Jersey. Tirza is an avid Mets fan, but I don't hold that against her. Now the daughters. Well, I do hold it against her a little. Simone Sobers is a junior at Barnard, class of 2013. She is a political science major and an Africana studies minor, and is a collegiate science and entry, or CSTEPS, Collegiate Science and Technology Entry Program scholar. She's a member of the university's Orisha Pan-African Dance Troupe and the Barnard Organization of Soul Sisters, also known as BOSS. Her interests lie in civil and human rights law, as well as international affairs and education. This past summer, Simone interned with the Human Rights Education Program at Amnesty International in Senegal. Sarah Belfer is a member of the class of 2012. She's a psychology major, a history minor, and a member of the Athena Scholars Program. She's had the wonderful opportunity to spend the spring of her junior year in London. On campus, Sarah is a Barnard student admissions representative and is involved in the Barnard Columbia Hillel. Last summer, Sarah interned for a clothing company and for an internet startup. And finally, Deena Mitlak is a member of the class of 2012 as well. She's the daughter of a lawyer, that would be Tirza, and an IT project manager, and she's majoring in economics and mathematics. She's writing her senior thesis on why the price of college has risen so much faster than inflation over the last few decades. I will not participate. Deena had the great opportunity of studying abroad in Paris for the fall semester of 2012, which introduced her to the city of Paris and to French culture. She enjoys tutoring on campus for HEOP, the Higher Education Opportunity Program. In her spare time, she likes to discover new restaurants and grocery stores and explore New York City. So I'm going to turn it over to Tirza.
Okay. Thank you so much. So we are going to start with a PowerPoint. It's wonderful to see everyone here. Can I see by a show of hands how many are current Barnard students? Terrific. Lovely. So we put this PowerPoint together to just give us a bit of a backdrop, kind of building on what Anna Quindlen, can you hear me okay? Kind of building on what Anna Quindlen was talking about. If you compare your expected entry into the workforce in the next few years to when a group of us entered back in the 70s, women have actually made enormous strides over the last 30 years. There's something called the Family Medical Leave Act, which was passed in 1992, which has made a tremendous difference to working mothers. You now have a guarantee of 12 weeks unpaid leave time. That did not exist when I had my first child, and it was something I negotiated when I was in-house at that time at the Port Authority. But at the same time, there is something called the pay gap. It's still there. And there are a number of factors that contribute to it. And so this PowerPoint is designed to just quickly flag that as a backdrop for our conversation tonight. And this comes from Behind the Pay Gap, which is an AAUW study. And if you look at this first slide, incredibly, just 1 year out of college, the pay gap is 80%. 10 years after graduation, women fall further behind, earning only 69% as much as men earn. Possible factors which are discussed at length in the study are college selectivity, choice of major, good old-fashioned employment discrimination, which we know still exists, and the division of labor within families. Motherhood and fatherhood affect careers differently, and some of us can talk about that, and I think that's a hard nut to crack, but there it is. And mothers are more likely than fathers to work part-time, take leave, or take a break from the workforce, and these are factors that negatively affect wages. And here's more from this AAUW study. Among women who graduated from college in 1992-93, more than 1/5 of mothers were out of the workforce in 2003, and another 17% were working part-time. And according to the study, less than 2% of fathers were out of the workforce in 2003, and less than 2% were working part-time. And here, you know, again, about the division of labor within families. And I think back to a time when I took a little bit of time off after my third child was born and took part in this wonderful colloquium at Seton Hall Law School with a man who was around my age. He'd gone to Columbia College, and like me, he had just had his third child. And I said, "Gee, Michael, how are you managing?" And he said, "You know, Tirza, when I go to the office Monday morning and I have my first cup of coffee, that's heaven." And I thought, you know, we're experiencing this third child pretty differently now, aren't we? And so, like my friend Michael, men appear to spend more time at the office after they become parents, whereas women spend considerably less time at work after becoming a mother. And here's the crux of it, I think, for a lot of us. When we try and make childcare arrangements, it's very time-consuming. I still remember interviewing my first nanny, and then, you know, getting the children into center-based daycare. You want to check it out. You want to make sure the nanny knows what she's doing. You want to introduce her to the neighbors and the other working families on the block. And so there you go. Mothers on average make 80% of the child care arrangements for their children. And that's my list of sources. Is Tova Klein here by any chance? Because Tova is in the Child Development Center, and she helped me put the slides together.
Tova runs our Barnard. Thank you, Tirza. So we're going to move into our panel now. That was just meant to give you some cheery context. And I'm going to ask each of our mothers now, each of our alumni actually, to talk a little bit about the opportunities and challenges that they have faced in their professional lives. Why don't we start with you, Sharon?
Okay. I don't know, is this on?
I think they should all be on.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, Dean Denberg and Tirza, for organizing this and inviting me to participate. When I listened to Anna Quindlen, her opening remarks, I sort of decided to rethink what I was going to say, because it was interesting listening to her story, and I think my story may be a little different from some of the others on the panel. and even from my own daughter. I grew up in a predominantly poor African-American neighborhood in Washington, D.C., and as my brother likes to say, we didn't know we were poor or disadvantaged because we had loving, dedicated parents, and even though they were separated and divorced, they were both very much involved in our lives and gave us enormous opportunities. And like Anna, I modeled my mothering after my own mother. She was a hard worker. She took care of children in our home, and she was a working mother. But my daughter had a totally different, my two daughters have had totally different lives. Simone, I don't know if she's going to say this, but she was actually born in Thailand and grew up all over the world. And the challenge I've had as a mother, raising daughters who've grown up in Africa and Asia, is making sure they understood their own history, their own cultural background, and so making sure that they had a place in the world where we live. They grew up as third culture kids, but they understood that they were African American. And we celebrated being African American everywhere we went. Being in the U.S. Foreign Service is a challenge. It is still a predominantly white male organization, and as a woman of color, I've had to really steer my career very carefully, particularly working in the developing world where women are not usually in positions of power. In Pakistan, for example, I was the only female in my office. The secretaries, the local secretaries were male, and I was only one of 3 females in the entire mission, as we call our offices overseas at USAID, out of about 200 people. And so working, working in that environment had real challenges. Had to prove ourselves as experts. We had to find our place. But the U.S. Foreign Service is not just the work of one individual, the officer. The entire family works when you're in the Foreign Service. Simone and her sister have had to help me host dinners with foreign dignitaries, with the U.S. ambassador. They have engaged at high-level discussions at our table, and they've attended events with me and done tours of our projects as my assistant in northern Nigeria, for example. So it's been a family, a working family history. With each new country, we have to learn the cultural norms. They change schools. We have to learn different languages, and we have to adjust to being African Americans in some cultures where our color or the texture of our skin is, or our hair is different and unique. And for example, in Indonesia, when we would go out and visit some of the wonderful historic and tourist sites that Indonesians themselves frequent, whatever the site was and the tourists were looking at, all of a sudden they turned towards us and started taking pictures, and so we had to get used to that and accept it. One question we wanted to ask ourselves is, what does success look like? And for me, After spending 25 years overseas, working in different cultures, success looks like, in terms of my daughters, daughters who know and understand the world and how it works. Daughters who appreciate the fact that they are privileged, but are grounded in the experiences of others and understanding that others live differently and appreciate that fact. Daughters who grew up as third culture kids, but again, know who they are. They're grounded in being African American. And daughters who will test and challenge the norms of motherhood because they grew up, in fact, with a father who's an artist who worked at home and who did a lot of the parenting. And so I think they don't expect to be women who do a lot of the parenting. They will expect that their spouses share in that responsibility. My concerns are that our daughters are taught and trained by us for a world that no longer exists. The world is constantly changing, and I think this is true for every generation. And so as mothers, we're concerned that, unlike ourselves, when we finished Barnard, the world was open to us. We had lots of opportunities. We could decide to go to law school or medical school or seek a job, but the world has changed and the jobs may not be there. And so it is a challenge, but what we hope that we've instilled in our daughters are young women who feel restless but not hopeless. Young women who will question the world and explore the world and find hope in every corner. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So for my 5 minutes, because we really want to leave time for a discussion amongst ourselves and with the audience, I want to focus on, I guess, 3 areas. The first is going to be the subject of role models. Second is medicine as a career for women and women with families. And then I guess sort of the third will be general. I want to acknowledge something we did talk about in our phone conversations, which is that while we have differences between us, there are some striking similarities, and our panel does not have any single mothers on it. I think we're all married to our first husbands and the fathers of our children, so that's something. This is not true, and it is certainly, while it might have its difficulties, it certainly has its advantages in having an intact family of origin in terms of career and motherhood. In terms of role model, that is really, as a first-generation American, which I think Barnard is proud to have had over the decades, many women for whom they are the first generation or the first person even in their family to attend college. I didn't have any role models. Certainly from my mother, who, as Dorothy Dean Denberg mentioned, was a Holocaust survivor, and being born in 1928, was just 11 when the Nazis invaded Poland, her home. So when she came to the United States, she came as a refugee and had gone to some high school, got a GED while I was growing up, actually, and we lived on a farm. This was not what my parents' original destiny would have been, but needless to say, World War II changed their lives dramatically. And while I knew that I wasn't going to be living that kind of life, they really didn't. My mother worked as a farm wife and as a homemaker. My father was a full-time farmer until I was in 11th grade when we moved to suburban New Jersey because the small family farm was really going bust. And he went into contracting. But those formative years, since we lived in a fairly isolated place, most of the people that I knew were also survivor families, and so their stories were somewhat similar, and the mothers didn't have higher education, and if they worked outside the home, it was in fairly like local businesses or something like that. What I would say I really did have a model, though, was of tremendous determination and dedication. So even though my mother didn't ever get to go to college, and I believe she certainly would have, she was and is, or continues to be, an incredible role model of, I would say, positive thinking, given her terrible life story, and of still having a sense of wonder in the world. And that is something, maybe this is jumping to the end, that I really hope is a legacy that my daughters and all of our daughters, and it is striking that we have all daughters on this panel, have. So in terms of role models, like I said, I didn't have role models for my mother having a career, and I also didn't have a role model for having household help. And this might seem like a small point, but it wasn't. When I hired my first babysitter or had a cleaning person come, this was like a shock to me. And it was a very big transition to have somebody else come in. How do you hire this person, find this person, what is this about? You know, how do you deal with this relationship? I mean, I think the goal of this panel is to talk about our own near experiences, so I'm going to stay, in the story of my life. I think for me, finding role models was in terms of how to plan a career or think about a career. I looked to my friends, my peers, and sort of along the way, some older women friends who were tremendous guides and help to me. Now, Anna brought up that example of this young woman who had this like master plan in college of how she was going to get married, have kids, do this. Well, I had no plan at all. I just want to go on record. I came to Barnard as 16. I did not have a plan. It was 1970. There was no plan in the picture. It was 2 years after 68. Everything was in turmoil, and I didn't have a plan. So for those of you who do not currently have a plan, you will find a plan, and you will get there. Also, I'm just going to tell the story that even though my husband graduated a year ahead of me, we did not meet each other until 10 years later. So this was not my college boyfriend that I happily kept company with and knew I had this secure romantic future with. Not at all. There were many bleak years in that department, and I lived to tell the tale. I also had my first daughter when I was 33, the second at 35, and my third at 38. And I was blessed and fortunate to not have any difficulties in the reproductive department. And I also was blessed, and are blessed, in not having any significant, really any health or educational or other challenges with our children. And I think that needs to be acknowledged also, that, career changes dramatically when you have a child with special needs or a daunting, challenging, life-threatening, or lingering, lasting, chronic health condition, which I was, as I say, blessed not to have. So in terms of, I think Sarah's going to talk about this also, and I believe it's already been mentioned that in my era, and I think this has something to do with being a child of immigrants, and there wasn't that sense of like, I could sort of hang out and explore the world and try things out. There was a certain like push, to find career. Many of the women of our generation did go directly to professional training. I did go right to medical school, and I don't feel like I don't really know what it's like to not know what you're doing. I was like propelled to medical school, and that was like the next step that I took. I didn't plan on I didn't think about psychiatry as being accommodating. I'm going into my second topic, in terms of medicine as a career. I didn't go into psychiatry because I thought of it as a flexible hour kind of program. Back in the 70s, I don't think we were just thinking along those lines. What I would say generally, and Sharon just made this point, it is a very changing time, and certainly medicine from an economic and professional, structural point of view is changing as well. So I am speaking about my own experience in the private practice model, which is somewhat unique to New York, and I'm not coming from, my experience is not in the managed care kind of factory, psychiatry practice, which is unfortunately all too common around the country. But I would say that while medical training is long, and most people don't finish really until they're around 30, because if you figure 4 years of medical school and at least 3 years of any internship and residency, and then usually people do some kind of extra thing, you're like around 30 when you leave. During those years, it's quite demanding. Obviously, if you do something part-time, if you can find that kind of residency, it's a little less so. But if you are married, it's pretty tough. People certainly do it to have children in those years. As I said, I didn't get married until after I finished all of that, so this wasn't a choice. This was kind of like how life fell out for me, and it fell out very fortunately. I would say, though, and I think, my story exemplifies this, that once you get past the training, I would say most of the medical fields are fairly accommodating to family life. I didn't have any conflict about wanting to work part-time. I wanted to work part-time. I was fortunate at having a spouse who was also earning a decent, significant living, so I could do that, which I don't take for granted. But medicine, most areas of medicine, part-time work doesn't mean less quality work. So if you see, either you work in a hospital, you see private patients, in terms of psychiatry, for 15 hours a week or 25 hours a week or 48 hours a week, it's not lessening the quality of the hours that you're seeing them. Yes, this would be different if you want to rise up in the academic rankings, which I wasn't interested in. I was really a very clinically oriented person. And I was very influenced at the time by psychoanalysis, which has certainly Sylvia Flesher, a friend of mine from Barnard and from the medical training and all of that, is here. It's certainly changed in terms of its sway in our culture. But it's interesting. Psychoanalysis, which for those of you who have done any reading, has not been seen, traditionally, like from a Freudian point of view, as being particularly fond of or encouraging of women. But it's paradoxically true that from the beginning of the field, there have been a lot of women in psychiatry and psychoanalysis. So there were a lot of models, actually, of women in the field. And one of them, actually, who was a big influence on me when I was at Mount Sinai, Eleanor Galenson, Barnard graduate in the 30s, maybe class of 34, went to Columbia Medical School, was a psychiatrist, did a lot of important work in infant observation, and there were a lot of women in psychiatry, and they were there. In terms of wage gap, I set my own fees, so I was the only one who was going to discriminate against myself, I mean, maybe you could say, I don't know, it's an interesting question, do women set lower fees? I don't think so. I don't think my colleagues were charging less per session than their male counterparts. So I did not personally experience wage discrimination. I did have some jobs very early on, which I know where my salary was on par with my colleagues, or I would say gender bias in terms of the patients that came my way or such. Something I do want to say about medicine and about gratification and challenges, which I wish for my daughters, that it has been an enormously rewarding profession. I have felt very satisfied and privileged to feel like I'm doing good. And I think that's something that, Sharon, you said in your own way too, that in the practice of psychiatry, you're sort of working with one person at a time, and you hope that by moving the trajectory of their life, even by a degree or two in an angle, the long-term trajectory is better. In my work running this pastoral counseling program in a rabbinical school, and I've gotten very interested in the issue of clergy training overall, I feel very lucky to have this opportunity to influence clergy who are primary first responders for many people, and to have an influence on them so that the communities that they influence, they will approach their work with greater psychological sophistication, let's hope, and sensitivity. To close, in terms of what's success, I think I've talked about success, in terms of my work life. One of the challenges, and I think this would be true for all of us, is like when you feel you've done enough. Like when the achievement bar, you keep on sort of raising it for yourself. Should I do this? Should I be on this committee? Should I try to write this article? And there's a kind of like a motor that is a little hard to quiet at times. I have to say, people talked about that third kid, and that guy said it was really tough. I had my children sort of late. I was pretty worried. Was I going to get there? And I was Emily is my firstborn, I was astounded at how much fun it was. I couldn't get over it. I was so worried about getting married. I kind of forgot to worry about, like, what, and after, like, that early infancy point, it was so much fun for me. And then when I had my second daughter, I had the first one, who was very delightful and chatting away, and it was the third, by the time the third came along, it was really a delightful experience. I feel, really happy to have had that and to continue to have it. And I hope that my daughters, and I feel that they do, share our basic values of having meaningful lives that are community and ethics and tradition-based. And I am delighted at what good friends they are to each other. And that has been really a joy to see. Thank you.
So, I wasn't great with infants. Luckily, Deena has no memory of this, and the other girls are not here. I came of age kind of around the same time, did not have a lot of role models, but I was really excited to be a lawyer in those early years. And I honestly was not very patient as a new mother. And there are a couple of people in this room who could probably attest to that. So it was something that I think I got better at with time. But in a way, what I experienced at Barnard, that time of great empowerment, and then going straight to law school and starting out at the Justice Department, and then being present, writing a brief to the Supreme Court, I just was not ready to downshift as I saw it. Looking back, I was again lucky, like both Sharon and Michelle have talked about. I was lucky to have a partner who was into parenting and who could be there when I did have to take the time off, when we did have the kind of childcare disruptions that that a lot of the studies talk about. But it's very, very interesting to hear you both talk about your own experiences. I too am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. My dad was. My mother came of age in the early 1950s. She had an associate's degree from Brooklyn Community College. She worked as a nurse's aide until she married in 1955, and she didn't work for pay again. She devoted herself to her family, and she and my dad raised their 3 loud and strong-willed children, and I am the oldest. Growing up, though, although my mom was an incredible cook, and I cannot begin to compete with her in the kitchen, I knew I did not want to follow in her footsteps. We grew up in a suburb of Long Island, and I knew that, if maybe my dad wasn't a cantor, or maybe my mother had worked some, that we would be living a little differently. So I did want to be out there. I didn't have any particular role models. When I grew up, I watched Mary Tyler Moore on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and I thought, gee, that looked like really a lot of fun. She was in this office with an important job. I vaguely remember Marlo Thomas, that girl. And then, because my dad was a cantor at a prominent synagogue in Toronto, I still remember Indira Gandhi coming to our synagogue. She had just become prime minister. I Googled her, so I know that was the time, like 1966, and it was like the city came to a halt, and there was this beautiful young woman entering, relatively young woman entering the synagogue, and it was like, wow, this is female power. So I was excited by that, and going to Barnard was just like the perfect place for me. At the time, Jacqueline Matfeld was president, and I still remember her charge to the students and how thrilled we were to be here. Looking back, because my father was a musician and I would dutifully go to temple with him, he would have me get up and sometimes do some of the prayers Friday night. This was not an egalitarian synagogue, but I guess they made an exception for the cantor's daughter. And looking back, those early expectations that I would perform probably helped me years later when someone handed me a file and say, Tirza, you have to be in court tomorrow. Can you handle this? And, I am still nervous when I go to court, but you get used to it, you get hardened, and, probably those early times of being expected to get up there helped me. Talk about the Mets. Okay, the Mets had a rough season. Also, as a little girl in a Sabbath observant family, what could I do Saturday afternoons? I would watch the game of the week. And I became entranced by the game of the week. Anybody remember Tony Kubek? Kurt Gowdy? So, those were things that as I worked in, a male-dominated field, most weeks when I go to court, probably 75–80% of the judges I appear before are men. That passion for sports has helped me just kind of accidentally that I became entranced by baseball. When I was at Yale, I was invited to be in a football pool. The statute of limitations has run, and it was in New York, so anyway, I can safely mention that. And you would, Dorothy. And I throw that in because I was before a judge very recently. This is something you don't learn in law school, and I realized I was making this argument, and I realized he had not read our papers. He just wasn't ready. This happens in real life with judges. You don't pick that up in law school. And so we had some downtime afterwards. We were going to meet with him again, and I said, and it was maybe a week before the Super Bowl, and I said, Your Honor, who do you think's going to win the Super Bowl? And we just had a conversation about that, and it was an icebreaker because I had made him uncomfortable in our previous set of discussions, getting into the details of my case. So there are things in my childhood that I think helped me along the way in the profession. But one of the reasons I put the PowerPoint together and with a list of sources, and we have copies, is that I think for women in the law, as exciting and rewarding as the profession is, there are still major obstacles, maybe in contrast to what Michelle is describing. It is hard to work part-time at most large law firms. Many of us spent time, and I know I did early in my career, before I had children, working kind of round the clock, being available, to have my brief review at 11 at night and being told that the time that I was waiting was all billable time. I didn't like doing that when I was single without children. I didn't like doing it then. I thought it was like a very kind of narrow way to live one's life. I think the legal profession has a way to go in the private sector. One of the sources I cite is to the ABA. There's a commission on the status of women. And even today, with about 48–50% of law school graduates being women today, some 20% or 18 to 20% become partners in law firms. And that's a reality. The billable hour is still way too important. It doesn't fit well with combining work and family. And I think, my experience kind of mirrors that. So I'm happily in the Attorney General's office. Honestly, if I were not part of a two-income family, we couldn't have the kind of lifestyle that we have. We have Deena at Barnard and our middle girl who still can't figure out why she's not at Barnard, but we couldn't get her to apply. She wanted to go to her own women's college, and she's at that college in Massachusetts, starts with a W. And then we have a third, and
Still applied to transfer.
That's true enough. But when one thinks about, the cost of college today, and I'm so glad Deena's doing her senior thesis on the topic, it's an expensive time to raise children. I mean, one hopes that the costs become more manageable, that there's loan forgiveness and, things to make higher education easier. But we very much have to work to have the kind of, affluent lifestyle that we do have. So when Sharon asked the question, when we talked about this internally, how does one define success? I think for women it's more diffuse. It's not just the paycheck one brings home. It's the kind of financial security that we're able to provide as a two-income family. It's the kind of downtime that we can have, and it's the texture of our lives, which as I get more senior, I am able to take more time. I wasn't great with infants. I think I got better when they were in elementary school, and I think now that, they're teens and older, I'm really hitting my stride.
That's actually for Deena to say, but I won't go there. So, thank you, mothers. We're going to give each of our daughters now the same 5 minutes. You'll notice that only one mother got close to 5 minutes, but I'm not pointing that out. So let's see how the daughters do with their 5 minutes. You're first.
Okay. I will try to be as concise as possible. The three of us got together and we decided that some points we wanted to discuss included our, the ways in which our mothers sort of, their lifestyles influenced the way we were raised and how we grew up. So a couple of points that I'll bring up are how much was home and work life mixed together when we look at our mothers, and how much did it affect our family life, and how much did we know about our mother's work. We also talked about the kind of role models, kind of women that our mothers sort of surrounded us with, and how that affected us, as well as a pretty obvious question to ask: what brought us to Barnard, and why? What is this connection that our mothers, Barnard alum, now have Barnard daughters? So I'll first talk about the first. My mom says, it's funny because my mom said the exact term that I'm about to say, and we did not discuss this, which is, in my family, we were very much a working family unit, is what I called it. And this is for many reasons. As a foreign service officer, you are posted to different countries, and as my mom explained, a diplomat. Every member of the family is a diplomat, therefore a representative of not only like the family, but also the State Department and thus the state. And so we really worked together. To explain, this is particularly important also as a minority. We were living in communities that were primarily of diplomats, and as my mom also said, there are very few people of color in the Foreign Service department, in the State Department. So being a representative was even more salient. I think that the family unit in working overseas becomes like magnified because moving around, the family is really the only constant. So it was very clear that that there were responsibilities for each member of the family, and that my mother's success was really dependent on all of us. My father, and we talked about how there are no men here, but my father played a big role in my mom's success and our family's success. He used to work in the Foreign Service as well, but stopped doing that and became an artist because it's his passion, but also because they wanted to ensure that we were raised a certain way. And that would not have been possible without the decisions that he made, and also the support that my mom had. So all of this became very, very apparent to me simply because the way our family was structured was so dependent on our success. And you could see, looking at different families in the Foreign Service, that if there isn't a good balance, if there are families that are not really able to pay attention as much to their children as others are, or if there are just different manners of dealing with children in the balance, then a lot of things can fall apart. There is a very high divorce rate in the Foreign Service, and families often can go down the deep end. So this became very, very important. So also, about what we knew about my mom's work, well, I knew a lot. I mean, everywhere we went sort of depended on what my mom was doing. And I naturally became curious about why we were going to Indonesia or why we were going to Senegal. So I learned more and more about what my mom was doing and the relevance of her work. My mom is very passionate about what she does. And I was in a very unique situation where I was always in what they term developing countries. So the economic disparity was clear. So issues of development were something that was often a dinner conversation. And so I became very much interested in my mom's work, which has obviously turned into an inspiration for my own career decisions. I'm a political science major. So I would say that also severely made a great impression on me. What else did I want to say? But yes, so, and the kinds of women that my mom surrounded my sister and I with also is severely affected by the fact that we were foreign, that my mom was a Foreign Service officer. I believe that the diplomat world and the world overseas is sort of it displays a sort of extreme version of, I guess, this society in which it's particularly dependent on a single, sort of like a single breadwinning household, because every post is determined by one person's job. So most often you have one person whose career is a priority in the family. And of course you have both parents often working, but the other parent, their work is less determinant of how the family is. It's often part-time, it's often whatever they can get as a non-citizen of that country. So it's very difficult even for them to get a job. So I was surrounded, on one end I was surrounded by a lot of families that were predominantly male breadwinning families, but at the same time my mother's friends and her friends are often were generally women that she worked with. They were the unique female breadwinner. And so I was surrounded by a lot of very strong working women who had decided to take a career that really took, literally took them to different places. It's a tasking career and taxing career, and so their decisions to do that came from a high resolve, I would say. So I experienced a variety. I experienced a variety of seeing a lot of mothers who stayed at home, as well as seeing a lot of mothers, as well as women who were not mothers, or women who were single mothers who worked and had a very taxing career. I also was, from my friends at school, just surrounded by women who were in very different situations. In a lot of the countries that I lived in, there is a difference between the rights that are allotted to women as there are to men, which we really have. We are very fortunate in the U.S. to not have these problems. But for instance, in a few countries, women do not have rights to land. women do not have the right to divorce or the rights to their children. So these severely affected the choices that they made. So I had friends who were very, very dependent on their children's fathers, and that determined their livelihood. And so seeing that comparison to the way that my family was and my friend's family really opened my mind to what kind of opportunities I have and what I can make for myself. And lastly, I'll be quick. Yeah, lastly, I'll talk about why I'm at Barnard. It's interesting. My mom was not one to trumpet Barnard throughout my life. And yet, both my sister and I have attended Barnard. So what does that say? I think that despite the lack of Barnard sweatshirts or Barnard paraphernalia, my mom definitely she definitely inspired qualities in us, ideologies in us that are synonymous with Barnard, such as fostering, being a part of a community that is about leadership, about fostering leadership, and the importance of having people around you that inspire you. And particularly women around you that inspire, potential role models. And so I knew that when I was looking at colleges that I wanted to be somewhere where I could interact with my professors, where I could really learn and excel with the having people who I knew would be dedicated to me as a student and would be dedicated to being a role model for me as a student. And I knew that Barnard was that kind of place. So that sort of hands-on and not only demanding that I garner relationships with people from different generations as well as, people who've had different experiences, but also a place that's very nurturing. I knew that that's what my mom had always told me is something that I should look for and gain from, and I knew that Barnard was that kind of place. And I can't speak for my sister, but I think definitely, particularly once she got here, she really took advantage of that as well. And and so I think that that's definitely a reason why we both came here, and we love our experience here. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. So the first thing I'll talk about was sort of the intersection of our home life and my mom's work life. So as my mom mentioned, her career allowed her to have flexible hours and to make her own schedule. Sorry. I would just compare that to my father's job, which generally had longer hours and more travel and that type of thing. And then another thing I just wanted to mention about home work life intersection is that while I definitely understood what kinds of things my mom was doing at work, home and work were very separate because as a psychiatrist, there's confidentiality and all that with patients. So I never went with my mom to work for the day, and I never knew any of the people who she was spending her work days with. So I guess that really created a separation between those two spheres in life. In terms of the types of women I was surrounded with, so both my mother's friends and my friends' mothers, I would say most of them worked, and I would say many, if not most, also worked in other health-related professions, many of them also therapists and that type of thing. And then I would also say a lot of the women who I knew who weren't working did a lot of community-oriented activities as well. So I definitely feel like I was surrounded by a lot of very high energy women who were channeling that into different things. And then another sort of takeaway from my mom's work life and my father's is that they both develop skills through their work that they use in other parts of their lives. So for example, in working with nonprofit organizations, as my mom talked about before a bit, skills that they were able to bring to that kind of work because of their professional careers. And then in terms of choosing Barnard, I would say that I grew up with a lot of women who, or surrounded by a lot of women who, like my mother, had gone to Barnard. So it was definitely something I was very familiar with. So even if we weren't talking about Barnard, like Simone said, there were certain values and I guess a certain type of person that I was very familiar with, so that it was always something familiar to me, and those were things that I valued. And then there were also all these other just great things about Barnard. And then, as we've also talked about before, in terms of my own job decisions compared to my mother's, I'm not sure I'm a senior and I'm not sure what I want to do next year. So just sort of as we've discussed, like having a sense of privilege and the opportunity to kind of try different things out and to look around, and I'm not on a direct training track as my mother was. So I think that that's an amazing opportunity, and also sometimes difficult to figure out what you want to do if you don't feel the pressure to choose one thing early and stick with it.
Hi, everyone. As my mom said, she chose a very different path in life than her mother did. My grandmother still tells me that it's nice to be smart, but I have to meet a nice man and get married, and then my life will be good. And I'm really glad that, I don't have to just follow that path, and I can, study whatever I want and aspire to become whoever I want in terms of career. So I'm really glad that I had a mom with a great career. I'm also glad that she has flexible hours right now, so she can come visit me at Barnard. She can spend time with me at home. That's a nice aspect of her work too. As Simone and Sharon touched on, we also have a working family. Not in terms of living abroad and traveling like that, but growing up, neither of my parents was very interested in cooking. I remember eating chicken with wine and garlic powder on for Shabbat dinners, and I remember thinking that I wanted food to taste better than that. So I became interested in cooking because, both my parents worked, and it was actually a great thing for me. I was in the kitchen by myself, kind of having the adventures alone, and it was a great kind of thing for me to discover for myself. And since then, I've taught my mom some things about cooking. My family's much more interested in it, which is great. And I'll just talk a little about why I chose Barnard. My mom has spoken to me about Barnard since I was little. I hear that I wore the Barnard bib, too. And when I think about her life narrative, I think of Barnard as this great place that kind of opened up all these other opportunities to her and afforded her the confidence that was so crucial for her to go off and have that great career. And especially when she went to college, it was, a new, women's liberation, and having a mother like she had that wasn't a role model to her in that way, that it was a great place for that. And I'm definitely finding that Barnard still has that great ability to instill confidence in its students, make us feel like strong women, and I'm really glad I'm here.
Well, thank you very much. You've actually answered all the provocative questions I had here for when conversation lagged. But I do want to toss out two questions before we open it to the audience. And the first, you've touched on, in some ways, the mothers more so than the daughters. Each gave an insight into how they would define success, but I'm very interested in how the three younger women on our panel, in the context of your lives to date and your parents' examples and so on, how you would define success, personal, professional.
Our own success, or as
Yes, what would success look like for you?
That's okay. I would say that success for me would be achieving a fulfilled and balanced life, being able to not only excel in whatever career I find, but also to have found a life partner and children that I can attend to. So it's for me, having one extreme is not a successful life goal for me. I would rather have the balance, and I think that's definitely been influenced from my own experience, where my parents sort of balanced it out. Also, I guess from my own experience, I would say that unfortunately, my dad actually influences these ideas as well, is because he has changed his career often, and being able to know that, be confident in what I can do, and knowing that if I need to, I can change and adapt, I think is very important.
Yeah, I would agree with what Simone said, and also just say that from my experience, I never felt like I definitely think balance is something that I value, and I want to find work that's interesting and satisfying, but the model that I had wasn't that it was sort of this really difficult thing to juggle. It worked pretty well together, so I guess different professions would be different depending on what I choose to do, but from the way I saw it was something that worked really well together, the sort of work and family life balance.
Like Sarah and Simone, I also want both. I guess a lot of young women today want both the family and a great career. As the mothers on this panel have said, it's not easy. Like, I know my mom works really hard to be both a mother and a lawyer, but I think it's really fulfilling, and it's fun, and it's doable. So,
Thank you. And there's one more question, and then it's your turn. For the mothers, if you look ahead to your daughters' lives, when they're sitting here when I do this again in 20 years, and more importantly, when you look ahead to your granddaughters, and I have one who's 2 months old, and it's the best, but what do you see as the challenges that remain?
You can go out of order.
Okay, fine. All right, we're going out of order. It's
Thank
official.
you brave Barnard women.
It's official. I think the greatest challenge for our daughters collectively is the division of labor within families, and the cultural, still the cultural conditioning that will keep the mom at home. And, when I say challenge, maybe that's not quite the right word. It's just like, it's a factor. It's just there. And Warren almost came tonight. Now I'm really glad he didn't. And there is a man in the room, Jason, back there, who was very helpful. Hi, Jason. Because Warren would have been the second man in the room. But, men really have to be part of the answer. They're beginning to be part of the answer, I think, in our generation right here. But it has to be... we have to go a lot further with kind of building the team around children. And I remember a talk I went to with Justice Ginsburg just a few years ago, and she was just an incredible advocate for women and women's rights, and could not even get a job coming out of law school. She's now, in her 70s, obviously on the Supreme Court, still hanging in there. But she said, the challenge for women is who will take care of the children? And I think for the most part, those of us who graduated in the 70s and 80s, even if we are getting ready to go to Superior Court next week, we're still, getting the medical forms and filling them out. And we're still making sure that, our child tried out for the school play. And I'm in a household where really, you know, my husband is amazing. I mean, he does a lot of that. And today I didn't print out the medical form, and he did. Because, you know, we've been doing this now for a lot of years, but I think it's that kind of cultural conditioning that still makes it hard for women to get the kind of balance that they want, and that men still take for granted when they have children.
To kind of continue in the division of labor theme, we have in our family, I would say, a fairly classic division of labor. And I've joked around when I did some panel on women in philanthropy or whatever, that if I were hit by a bus, my husband could just order out from Fairway. But if the reverse, God forbid, happened, I would really be up a creek. Because I don't really know our financial structure well. I don't do the insurance. I don't do the investments. Now, he is in the financial sector, and I do the more child and domestic and that kind of stuff, the social arrangements, and he does more of the traditional financial one. And I would say for the girls, our daughters here, I think it's really important to be fluent in some of these, key aspects of life. And I have kind of, I don't know, just fallen behind on that one. Again, because my husband is so competent in them, it was just easier to continue with that. The other point I would make, I think just looking to the future, our society, and I think so much having to do with the nature of current communications, it's a little hard to know what's going to be next in the next 10 or 20 years. And I think the fragmentation of society and the isolation of people, kind of with their own whatever, gadget they're involved with, is extremely profound. And I have, how many times actually, it was funny, this guy the designer who helped us with our apartment, had the guts to go up to this woman, I guess it was, or maybe it was a man, I don't even know, who had an iPod on and was walking his or her dog and said, "Excuse me," he's from Texas, "Excuse me, ma'am, your dog needs you." Now, how many times, he's just a riot, but how many times have we seen that, with children? And I think that, yes, there is the uber mom thing that Anna was talking about, which I don't think any of us subscribe to in a big way. I am sorry, girls, that I didn't have you learn how to swim better, but that's, okay, you'll figure it out. I think that the sort of preoccupation with other activities is great. The other thing I just want to mention is, none of our mothers were career women. Now, you were abroad most of the time, but it's a different. My mother would pitch in. My mother was sort of available. As more and more women become professional and have careers, it's sort of hard to find, the person who can spell you in a spot. And I think that's a big difference that, will continue to exist.
I'd like to follow up on what Michelle said. I wanted to talk about communication. I think, I'm tied to my BlackBerry. I mean, I'm always on my BlackBerry. I can actually, work from home now full-time because I have access to everybody through my BlackBerry, my iPad. And we've read all the statistics about how many hours a week children watch TV or spend on the computer. And I think that will be the challenge our daughters will have when they're sitting here, keeping those lines of communication open with their children and sitting down at the dinner table and having real conversations and building that trust with their kids that only comes from interacting face to face. We were fortunate being overseas that, we didn't have cable TV and 2,000 channels. We had a few shows American shows that we could watch, and we watched them together as a family, and we talked about what happened, in a specific episode, what went right with that family or that particular teenage girl, and what happened and what went wrong. And we had dinners together every night. We did a lot of talking with our kids. I would put down the cell phone or turn off the TV when they wanted to sit down and talk to me. It's hard to do that now. So I think that's going to be the real challenge. With both my daughters, I told them and repeatedly told them that You know, you can talk to me about anything and bring any problem to me. I may not like, you know, what's happening in your life, but I'm going to be there. I'm your safe place. And I think they only believe that because we've built this trust relationship over the years. And keeping those communications open, those lines of communications open, and building that trust over time takes a lot of time. And you don't get it if you spend most of your time on the computer or watching cable TV, so.
Thank you very much. So now it's your turn. We'd love to take some questions. There should be 2 mics? Yes, okay. So hands, blue blouse, then white blouse.
Well, I certainly want to thank you all for being here, and it's been wonderful to sit here as a Barnard alum with my second Barnard daughter, and I'm very proud of that. But I'm also very proud to be the mother of 2 sons, and I think that is a little bit ironic that we have a whole panel of people who only have mothers with daughters, because I would just, to some extent, want to respond to the challenge that Dr. Denberg put out just now. What is the challenge for the next generation? And one of the challenges is to raise feminist sons. And you know, I feel that those of us in the room who have been blessed with sons, that's been our charge also. I remember when my oldest child was born, he was one of my older friends said to me, that is your job now, to raise a son who is going to understand what it means to, you know, be an equal partner with women in the culture. And it's more of a comment than a question, but I just want to put it out there that we are out here trying to do that too.
You're quite right, and I thank you for pointing that out. I did not consciously go out seeking mothers who happen to have only daughters. Though I have to say, I myself am the mother of 3 daughters, and I can't stand the expression "only daughters." What I mean to say is, I happen to be the mother of 3 daughters. I'm very happy for you, and I'm thrilled to have 2 grandsons and 2 great sons-in-laws. I didn't really miss having the boy people when I had my children, but you are absolutely right, and it is only serendipitous that these mothers don't also have sons.
Yeah, but Dorothy, there are no accidents in the unconscious.
So true. Dr. Friedman. Okay. White blouse.
I have one comment and then one question. And also I agree, I actually have a 3.5-year-old daughter, but my brother has 2 boys, and of course my sister-in-law and my brother are very much focused on that as well. This has been really great, and I appreciate it. And I think to some extent I'm at a place in my life where I'm sort of between where you are and where your daughters are, and looking ahead at my career and family, thinking, really? You know, like, God, how do you do this? You know, and I have to say one thing that has been very interesting and disappointing for me and my husband. When we had my daughter, we assumed everybody was going to be in a double income family. I mean, this is 2011, you know. What we found was very different. And I have to say, the 3.5 years I've been a working mom, and I have an extremely demanding job. I'm in the humanitarian profession as well. I'm a regional director for the International Rescue Committee. So I'm also trying to finish my PhD. Hopefully I'll be done in February, which is all kind of nuts. But my husband won't let me quit at this point. But I found myself in a very lonely place because it's rushing to catch the train on the railroad at 6:30 in the morning to get into work for a very demanding job. And if I'm lucky, get home in time to maybe get dinner, with my husband and my daughter. And not being able to connect with other women. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the women in my area are home. And the days that I work home, they'll invite me over, but I have no, I'm working. I have 5 conference calls. I don't, I'm actually working from home. And it was very disappointing, and it was equally disappointing because my husband is actually the one who's made somewhat of a sacrifice. He stays home on Tuesdays with my daughter and also only works half days Wednesday so he can share in picking her up and, all of that. And so for me, I look at the path that my parents have paved, the path that you women have paved, and will continue to, but it has been a little bit disappointing in that sense, and at times a little bit lonely for me and my husband. Not tragic. I mean, we do have friends, but it was, it is hard. It is isolating. I mean, it's you're just running around and everything. The only other point I'd like to bring up, and I think that Barnard has had a very proud tradition of women supporting women and coaching them. I feel like that's something that is not as common anymore. And I think that women, especially women who have gone through the challenges and the successes of having a career, raising kids, having partners, etc., helping the next generations, I think could be really tremendous. For me now, I'm looking for that. And I think that it can be incredibly valuable for women to share that knowledge and to share the experiences and to share the moments when they thought, how can I do this? Or am I damaging my child? I have plenty of those moments when I put her in front of the TV for an hour so I could just finish one more paragraph. It's okay, but to have somebody who's actually walked through that and sharing that wisdom and that knowledge to other women so that the other women know, okay, I can step through this too. So anyway, thank you all for being here.
Could I just make one comment? Because I remember those early days, and I also lived in a suburb, and we talked about this among the moms, how your commute makes a difference. A commute with a child or 2 or 3, kind of adds to your day and makes it harder for you to then, bond with your community. And, it was really dumb luck, and so we all know, we're all old enough here to know, at least some of us, that, dumb luck plays a big role in life, bigger than it should, that I joined a baby group of mostly women who stayed home when Deena was, 4 weeks old. And there are ways to do it. It's hard, but through your YWCA or your JCC or your church or temple, there may well be, parenting groups. And I'm thinking of what is the new sitcom with the man who decides to stay home, Up All Night. I think it's very funny because he's so much in the minority statistically, according to the AAUW, but that really is a great way for young parents to meet each other. You join a play group, in this case it was, like a Gymboree type group. And, mothers and fathers are really they're all very anxious for their young children to bond with each other. It's just harder to do when your work hours and your PhD are so cutting into your day. But it is doable because mothers, whether they're home or not, very much want that for their babies and young children.
I would just add from personal experience that the most intense and overwhelming period of my life was in the 8 months or so before I finished my dissertation. And I was working here, and I had 2 children. And in point of fact, anything else, a parenting group, I had exactly time to fit in both sets of parents on Sunday, maybe. And everything else, once you finish your degree, you'll feel much better. Do we have a mic on this side, too?
Thank you for organizing this. As a Barnard graduate, I always said that it would have been a great experience to have this forum, and it's encouraging to see so many students. As an executive mother, I've now had to start teaching at Columbia to pay for preschool. So that's another reality. So to you, I can exchange emails and we can be friends that way. I have a 3.5-year-old, and I run home every night to do family dinner at 7:30 at night, and after my son goes to sleep, I work and what have you. My question to you is, how do you stop? How do you slow down? And that's something that my mother constantly tells me, that I just have to stop a little bit. And you feel like you're being torn in so many directions, and it's something that I'm not one really just to sit down and read. I'm always trying to find something else I need to do just to catch up for the week or what have you. So I'm just curious to hear from you, what kind of things do you do just to take time for yourself or just to slow down?
Well, first I'd learned to delegate at work. Really, my strategy, and it's taken me a long time to get to this point, is, identify good people, hire them, empower them, delegate. And that frees up my time. And then, I just want to say, I felt awfully guilty all the time, when I was a young mother in particular. And I just decided that wasn't doing me any good or my girls any good. And so I would just, try to shed the guilt. Constantly talking to myself, and you can tell me if that was right.
You were right, I can tell.
Okay. But, when I was a young girl, I worked in hospitals as a candy striper in children's wards, and I saw, kids who were abuse victims and kids that were neglected, and I am the product of a working mother, single working mother, and I just came to realize that, kids are really viable and resilient, and they love us no matter what.
And more than that, you're the only mother they have. They don't know
exactly. Yeah. And if you can just be that safe place that they can come to when they really need you, and they know how to find you, it's going to be okay. We just need to shed the guilt and relax, learn to relax. And it's hard, I know it's hard, and I don't envy you, particularly now when people have so much access to you through Blackberries and everything. I didn't have that when I was a young mother, and it's overwhelming. But I go and I do my spa days, and I try to do that now. I exercise and take time for myself.
I wanted to add a comment to what Sharon just said. What's that adage, if you want to get something done, ask a busy woman? I think you have to learn to say no also, because we do get asked to be on this committee or that board or whatever, and you feel like, like I said before about raising the bar, and you got to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Do I want to do it? Do I think I should do it? You got to have that mindfulness about what you're doing, and then when people ask you to do stuff, sometimes it's really hard to say no because it's a very worthy organization, it's a whatever it happens to be. We did talk, I forgot to say this, I was very lucky, I have always been very lucky to not have a commute. And not all circumstances obviously can have that, but not having a commute really of any length whatsoever, like a few minutes, was really a remarkable help, not just because I didn't have to get to a train, and a train can be sort of restful in some ways, but could quickly, turn on a dime. So if I did want to go to a kid's activity, or I did want to do X, Y, or Z, or come home, I could do that. But in line with that, I think you talked about this, or other people did, there is no such thing as working when the baby's sleeping. Like, if you work at home, you have to have help at home. Like, I thought, since my office was nearby, I'd come home and see what the kids, during lunch or whatever. It wasn't good. That coming in and out was not very good. And also, I certainly couldn't do psychiatric work, when the kid was sleeping. But you can't do any work. You can't count on that. It has to be, work at home means you have help at home and somebody, you're working.
We'll take 2 more questions, maybe 3, and then we have a reception around the corner in the Salzburger parlor so we can have informal conversation. Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on the comments that, what's your name?
Oh, I'm Jenny.
Jenny, I think we were actually in the same class, 95. There you go. I just wanted to follow up on some of Jenny's comments and then also make one additional comment and really thank you for holding this panel because I'm a full-time working mom. I have 2 little boys at home. I never stay in the city after work. I'm on the FDR flying like a maniac to get them from daycare. And I saw the email from Barnard and I said to my husband, somehow you have to pick them up because I have to be at this talk. Yes, it's been beneficial to hear from you, but I have to admit, I didn't think about coming to hear what the panelists had to say. I needed to be here to just be surrounded by other women who are feeling this and are feeling, a normal struggle in balancing your work and family life. And you've all been incredibly valuable to listen to in the comments from the audience, but it just feels supportive and less lonely to feel, to remember that this is just a period of life and you go through it, you struggle through it, and it will work somehow or another. So thank you for holding this panel. And the other comment I wanted to make, and it's following up on your comment, and then Sharon's comment, is just this issue of guilt. And I think so often we talk about feeling guilty as working moms because we have less time with our children or can't be there for this after-school program or whatnot. And I was reading the latest New Yorker magazine over the weekend and hiding in some closet because the kids were looking for me, and I said, don't get in here, I want to read this issue. And it was about Jill Abramson's appointment as the executive editor of the New York Times, and it was a really interesting article, but there was one sentence that stood out to me that ties with this issue of guilt, and that is she is in this position now, and she mentioned to her colleagues or in some meeting some funny situation that happened when she took her child to the dentist. And I thought, God, it's amazing. She talks about taking her kids to the dentist, and she's the executive editor of the New York Times. And I think it's important to remember that, yes, you should not feel guilty in terms of prioritizing your work and your friends and going to the spa or hiding out in the closet and reading the New Yorker. But it's also important to not hide how much you love your children at work. So when you're at work and people are just talking randomly about what they did over the weekend, we shouldn't feel guilty about talking about some funny, ridiculous thing that our kids did over the weekend, because that's our life too. And if people, I personally sense this sometimes in my place of work, and it's, you asked Dean Denberg what success means to the current students. To me, success in my balance is not feeling guilty when I'm at home talking about my work life or needing to get on email at 9 o'clock at night, and not feeling guilty at work, acknowledging that I have to be somewhere later and maybe I have to leave early, or telling some funny story about my kids, or having their funny drawing taped to my wall. And that's my struggle, and I try really hard to not feel guilty about that. So.
Thank you. So just to show you how interwoven my identity is with Barnard, what I took away from that article was that Jill Abramson's mother went to Barnard, which is embedded in that article in one phrase somewhere. 2 more questions? Back there.
I want to thank all of you, because I learned something from all of you. And I have a daughter who's now 28, and she refused to even consider Barnard, even though she came here to listen to the potential freshman speech. She had heard how wonderful Barnard was, not only from me, but also from my brother who went to Columbia. And she absolutely insisted that she had to go some other place where none of us have been. And the other interesting thing is that each one of my siblings and myself married someone from Columbia or Barnard. And none of us went to school at the same time. And that's how it worked out. So she went to Brandeis. She went on her own way. And I was almost devastated that she didn't come here, because I felt it was a much better choice for her. But I had a very hard time when I was in the doctoral program, because I thought that you could definitely have a baby, an infant, and get your doctoral degree. And I only hired a babysitter for when I went to class. And I started when she was 6 months old. And so I was very reassured by all the comments that I just heard, because I figured if I could go to Barnard and pull that off, and then I could start my career, and I could work until 9 o'clock at night and stay on my Barnard schedule, which meant reading until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I've never been able to get off that schedule. I'm still on it. I should certainly be able to get my doctorate. And I found out I just couldn't do it. I had to choose between her or the degree at that time. And it was one of the most painful things I had to do, because I knew that she had to be the choice. And I was very reassured hearing all the things you had to say. And it was worth coming tonight, if for no other reason than to hear that, because I am a working mother, and my daughter resented it terribly. And she's got a degree, and she absolutely insists that when she is ready to have her first child, which she says will be at 30, I don't think she really quite knows when it will be.
She's got it all figured out.
But she will not be working. In the meantime, her husband is getting a degree in child psych. And he will instantaneously have private patients when he graduates, as far as she's concerned, and life will be perfect. So I'm just waiting, but.
Thank you.
But thank you very.
Over here.
Hi. So I also was not going to apply to Barnard at high school. I don't know why. I didn't want to go to a girls' school and I didn't want to go to Barnard, but my mom made me apply, and I actually didn't get in, but I was like, phew, now I don't have to decide to go there. So I started at Brandeis, and then I transferred to Barnard. I realized by my sophomore year that I actually did want to go to Barnard, so I came junior year, and I graduated in '03. But the only reason I added that is because you just mentioned about Brandeis. What I wanted to ask the daughters is I just got my master's in mental health counseling. I majored in psychology, but didn't have a plan, didn't know what I wanted to do. And do you guys, how do you deal with the financial piece? Because no one really talked about that. And you talked about balancing work and family, and having a meaningful career, which I think mental health counseling is, although it's not to make a lot of money. And that also sort of depends then on other factors, other people. And so.
But I'm just going to toss out two quick things to that, and perhaps somebody else will want to add something. But in some of our preliminary conversations leading up to this evening, I happened to mention to Tirza that what I personally see as one of the greatest challenges ahead for my daughters, who are 35, working mother of two, 30 on maternity leave with a 2-month-old, and a senior in college, is the same exact challenge that I faced when my first daughter was born in 1976, and that is the lack of attractive and reliable and affordable childcare for working mothers at the earliest years. It continues to astonish me that this country lags behind so many other countries in some kind of standardized, controlled, regulated, stimulating childcare for young children. And I mention that because I think that factors heavily into some of the economic challenges. In the absence of one person who can stay home in any couple, there is an economic hurdle in who is going to take care of the children. And we as a nation have not done really well in that regard. And it was so striking to me 5 years ago when my oldest daughter, who's a physician, had her first child, to see her revisit all the same exact questions that I did 30 years earlier. One of the things that all of the panelists touched on is that this is a skewed group in the sense that everybody has a helpmate, and there are challenges in finding a way to afford to work in some cases. And I can just say from my own experience that having made a choice to work at a college, this college, there were years when my oldest children were young where my salary converted I guess the after-tax dollars, but maybe not, maybe more than the after-tax dollars, converted directly into childcare. The only way to work around that is to live as a family. You used a lovely phrase, as a working family unit. Because if you look at the aggregate and you don't think, oh man, I'm going to work every day for these long hours and working so hard, and it's going right out to childcare, I might as well stay home and take care of the kid myself. It doesn't work. It only works if you think, okay, I'm building a career and I'm setting a role model for my children, and at the end of the day, I will reach a point where they're in school and the child care costs and the economic benefits of working will go this way instead of that way.
Came from not having a job, a husband, or children right now, so I'm very much on the don't have a plan, exactly. So that's sort of like from the beginning, not having any of those pieces, thinking about how to put them together.
You have to go with the flow. This is the absolute last question, and then you're all welcome to join us in the Salzburger parlor, that way. Yes. Yes.
I guess I have two comments. One is, I also relate a lot with Jenny. I have a 5.5-year-old and a 5-month-old. Sure. And I've moved to suburban town in New Jersey, I won't name, and I've also felt very lonely. I feel like I'm in a little bit of an alternate universe where there's a lot of stay-at-home moms, who have created sort of rock wall existence and talk about making cookies and talk about the activities all the time, and I don't feel like I fit in. So is there something going on in certain communities that I missed out on, or I didn't expect this to occur? And I'm also coming at it from a perspective of being an attorney and having worked at a large firm and now having gone in-house, so I feel like my hours have improved.
Yeah.
And they're looking at it saying, wow, she works a lot. So how do you, and I definitely have a lot of guilt. So I've started with my daughter my own little PR campaign where I tell her, you can be anything you want. It's great for mommy to work, like selling my job and talking to her about it, just to sort of be an example for her. But I just wanted to ask you to address the question of women judging other women and women not supporting other women. I know that we also have a lot of expectations from stay-at-home moms, and I think the reason sometimes they channel a lot of their energy into school activities is because they're having certain issues as well. So I really wish women would support each other no matter what choices they make, and I don't necessarily see that. So I just wanted to see if you could address that.
That, to me, is very interesting. I think we have to move past it. There are lots of other working moms in your community, but you're not seeing them because they're not at the PTA meeting, and they're on the train or they're driving elsewhere. And it is a challenge. I mean, what I was able to do was, because my dad was a cantor, we were always kind of, synagogue rats, but, you can be whatever, however one wants to affiliate. I mean, that's a great way to just meet other families. And in New Jersey, because I do work in New Jersey, and we've lived in New Jersey since before Deena was born now, there are many working parents, and it's a challenge to meet them, but the local Y, the church, the synagogue, they're there, and they want to meet you. And in 20 years, I can tell you, because you know, I was able to step off and take longer maternity leaves, you know, with my third child. The women who made the choice to stay home, they'll want to be you. They will want to be out there. I mean, it's very hard. But I see that, you know, among women in their 50s. You know, they wish they were going to be yelled at by a judge next week like I will, you know, because, you know, it's fun to have war stories.
I wish maybe I might live in a world where I could support their choice, because sometimes it's economic. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily make sense for them, and they will support my choice. I think rather than there being any kind of rift there, because it's important. I think that's an important thing. And isn't that what it was all about? Allowing women to make choices and respecting them for whatever choice they make.
I think that's going to be the next panel.
Yeah.
So I just want to, two things. For anybody in the audience who would like a printout of the PowerPoint data, it's over here. You can pick it up. And for our panelists, I just thought, because I'll never get over the fact not one of my daughters went to Barnard. I thought you might like to have, I have one of these for each of you. I framed the thing so you can see your name and your daughter's name. And I hope this is just the first. Many shared moments. And the daughters, I have something more updated. So hilarious. So thank you all.
And I just want to say, for any daughters out there who, or Barnard alum, who don't have a plan yet, I do have material on USAID. I'm willing to share.
Very good, very good.